Coming up on this week's show, why you may never play your favourite retro games on your Nintendo Switch.
Big Atari VCS news.
And we look back on the best of 2019 in retro.
This week's show is brought to you by Future Publishing.
And Beer52, the world's most popular craft beer discovery club.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 203. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us again this week as we have a little celebration on the incredible year that was 2019. Now, looking around the table in front of me now, you have some bleary eyes. It's fair to say, it's late night, it's been a long year, but what a year 2019 has been.
It's been crazy. I was counting how many countries I've been to this year, and it's probably been about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I've been to that many countries, and all of them have been for retro gaming.
Yeah. I was about to say, is he just showing off? Is he just got like...
No. These haven't been holidays. These have been great retro events with you guys as well.
Yeah, it's been incredible. We've got more of those coming up in 2020 as well, which we're already filling up. We're going to be in Ireland in January for Amiga Island.
Yeah.
We booked the Airbnb the other day.
Yeah,
have to go now.
We'll be heading to the Netherlands at some point as well, and we also might be heading back to Germany. We'll see what's going on.
But yeah, I mean, this year has been incredible, and we thought this week we'd take an opportunity to have a look back on some of our personal highlights from this show in 2019. Now, every year, this has been a bit of a tradition. We've done it the last couple of years. Definitely not an excuse to have the week off and be lazy. Definitely not.
No, it's not a lazy clip show at all.
Definitely isn't one of those. It's a very lot of effort put into it, clip show. Because I looked through, I went back to January, and I was like, wow, people that we looked through, and I thought, was that only this year? Because, I mean, this year, actually, we've crammed so much into it. 51 podcasts this year.
I had to go, back on the website and look to when we started to pick some of the selection of this, and it was 5 pages of podcasts. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that is a lot.
And of course, we're now into our 200th as well. It has been an incredible year. So we are going to bring you our favourite bits of the Retro Hour podcast in 2019 in just a bit. Now, before we get into the news this week, there's been some really good stories that we're going to talk about in a moment. Let's give a huge thank you to the people who allow us to come in here week in, week out, at all hours of the day, and do this podcast for you every week, let you know what's happening in the world of retro gaming, source out these incredible interviews, bring the podcast to all these places around the world, which we love doing as well. And that is people who find it in their little lovely hearts to make a donation into the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. The last few weeks, Joe's done it. I thought we'd test Ravi's knowledge. He might be getting a bit rusty on this.
Yeah, sure.
How do you get in the Hall of Fame then, Ravi?
You go to the www.theretrohour.com.
He's so old school.
All the W's.
I feel like he's taking the mick out of me a little bit.
And you click support, and then you can donate in any currency through PayPal, or you can even donate to charity as well, where we have the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester. Really cool guys. But if you donate with PayPal, you will get mentioned in the Hall of Fame, and you can donate in any currency, and you can even do reoccurring payments.
Yeah, and it all really helps us out, obviously going into a new year as well. Around this time, all our subscriptions are due to be renewed, so it will be very useful if you've got a couple of quid kicking around. And this week, let's give a huge thank you to people who've made it into the Hall of Fame. The amazing Gabriel Crow,
Kevin Lee,
Jeff Owen,
and Howard Taylor, who all made donations into the running of the podcast. And if you'd like to do the same, you can find it on our website at theretrohour.com. Speaking of big supporters of the show as well, let's give a huge thank you to our favourite publisher, the incredible Future Publishing. Now, we were saying on last week's show how many magazines they've done over the years. We've been pretty much lifelong fans of Future Publishing,
They have a huge legacy, huge history, and, it's all quality.
I think my first ever computer magazine I bought was Amiga Shopper back in the day. That was one of theirs. That was a really good read. They obviously do so much. Retro Gamer magazine, which we've been talking about a lot recently. That's brought to you by Future Publishing. But they actually have 4 sister gaming magazines as well. Stuff like Official PlayStation, Official Xbox, PC Gamer, and the legendary Edge magazine. Now, Edge has been, such a long-established title. And it was the first kind of serious gamers mag, Edge. We did an episode earlier on in the year with Steve Jarrett, didn't we, talking about Edge magazine?
Yeah, it was that period of change in the gaming world where it really stepped up into that kind of adult, older study of gamings with Edge.
Well, kind of, when the PlayStation came around and gaming kind of felt like it grew up a bit, didn't it, when it its teenage years. And at the moment, Edge actually have got a run-through of their games of the decade. Now they're about to step into the swinging 20s. Might be long now. PlayStation.
The little dance he did there.
The Charleston.
That was just for you, Joe. Don't tell everyone. PlayStation Magazine this month have got something really good.
So they're talking about a game I'm really excited about. Marvel's Avengers game, PlayStation Magazine, talking about that again. The Black Widow trailer's just dropped as well, so I'm hyped as hell about it.
And Xbox Magazine has a hand-on with Disintegration, which is a new sci-fi shooter from the co-creators of Halo. And remember, Halo was that title that really blew up the Xbox.
Oh, absolutely. It's so hype, Halo. Whenever a new Halo release comes around, it's always huge. And PC Gamer, they've got a big preview of this upcoming strategy game, which is called Crusaders Kings 3. So whether it's that kind of industry insight that you want by Edge Magazine or the insider knowledge from official PlayStation or Xbox, there's something for everyone. And also if you are Christmas shopping, maybe even for yourself. I must admit, I've done a fair bit of that over the last couple of weeks.
I know. I feel like I need to get my mum to do this for me. I keep taking the mick out of her, but this is great. Just do this for me for Christmas.
Because you might be the same as me. My missus has been going, what do you want? My mum's been asking me, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But then you see stuff like this.
Yeah, if you need a recommendation for anyone in your family, send them this link. Now, what we want you to do is subscribe with the Retro Hour podcast, and we will give you an exclusive offer and save you so much money. You will actually get 83% off. So that means 3 issues for just £3.
That's really cool because
£1
actually
a magazine.
Yeah. Now, normally this is £18 in the shops, but if you want to subscribe, all you got to do is nip onto this website, myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/RHGame. So that is myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/RHGame with our good friends at Future Publishing. Now, before we get into our favourite bits of 2019, I think it's fair to say, even though, well, actually, you've technically got a Switch that you don't really use that much. You haven't got one. You've been saying all year, I'm going to get a Switch. You
I've
still
been
haven't got
saying
one.
for the entire year, I'm going to get a Switch. I'm going to get a Switch. And every week when we come in, I'm like, next week, that's it. I'm buying it, boys. I'm buying it.
Well, now you know what to ask for Christmas, don't you, Joe? That's,
Just not from me or Ravi. Now,
Oh.
actually, now, there is a little feature at the moment. There was a pretty good read, actually, on Nintendo Live. I mean, being a Nintendo website, they've kind of done the Switch angle on this, but it applies to a lot more than just a Switch. And the title of it is, it's why you'll never get to play your favourite retro game on your Switch. So what it's talking about is, games, people always say, why don't they release GoldenEye 007? Why don't they do an HD upgrade, that kind of thing? And one of the reasons that's stopping them doing it officially is that when that game was licensed, the James Bond license was only for like one game.
Okay.
And it didn't include all these kind of future, they didn't think that people want to play it 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
But they're talking about the fact that that is actually becoming more and more of an issue. Because when these deals were done with the original games, and this applies to so many different things, a lot of them had kind of either onboard sponsorship or they're actually a little bit cheeky about it.
Right.
Now, there was actually a few cases where you might be playing a game, for example, and instead of having, for example, I think they use a couple of examples in this article, Foster's or Marlboro cigarettes, they may have had a logo that looked very similar, but it changed a couple of the letters, that kind of thing.
And you have to remember that junk food and advertising for like bad products was in so many titles back then. It's unbelievable. And I can't imagine deals for stuff like Chubba Chups still kind of staying many years later.
Well, they're talking here about the fact that Sega were actually sued by a tobacco firm, Philip Morris, back in the day, because it was in Super Monaco GP, there was a Marlboro logo around the edge of the track. It was Marlboro or something, I think they put it as, but it looked really similar, and they got sued by it, so they had to go in and remove these assets. So what they're saying now is, the fact that these were all done so long ago, even if they were legit, these companies will have no record of doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So it creates a problem when you want to re-release these games on your platform.
I was just looking at this article, saw one of the screenshots, assumed it was a Terminator game,
Yeah.
and then realised it's a game called Mechanized Attack, which was influenced by a popular action horror film in which a robot wears human skin. Enemies often reveal cybernetic bodies underneath.
What could that be?
And I was like, oh, okay. So
That's the thing. I mean,
I get it.
Yeah. Well, back then, the video games industry, we've had a lot of musicians on back in the day. And they talk about the fact that they were getting their samples from, songs that were in the charts and that kind of thing. But really, they kind of felt like copyright didn't apply to games then because the gaming industry kind of flew under the radar.
Yeah.
But now it's becoming a problem when they want to re-release these games and sell them again.
But also, I think, that would be seen as, back then, a cool thing to put Marlboro in there. I think people would probably not want to be sneaking that in nowadays, but it just reminds me of those adverts. What's it called? My doctor smokes Marlboro.
The world's moved on a lot since those games were out. But they're also making an additional point as well about the fact that a lot of the old assets were not actually saved. And they're kind of saying it was kind of like in the 1930s, when like the movie industry was, really becoming mainstream cinemas and everything, before TV really. They're saying a lot of the time what they'd do then is they'd make a movie, they'd wipe it and reuse a film again for another movie.
Yeah, or reuse the sets for something else, yeah.
Yeah, they saw no value in preserving them.
Yeah, you hear about the lost films of the 1920s and 30s,
Yeah.
don't you? So yeah, it applies to games as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, they're talking about the fact, back in the gaming industry's younger, but in the early days of it, a lot of these companies, they didn't think to save the source code or didn't see any value in it, which we are better at these days, seeing the preservation aspect of it. But they're saying there's so many games out there that the source code's long lost and we'll never see re-released again on any platform, sadly.
Thank God for the fans kind of keeping this and preserving these things.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you really do want a way to play Rise of the Robots, I'm sure you can find a way to do it. It probably will never get a legal re-release again. Interesting read, though. So I'll link that up in our show notes if you want to check it out. Now, tell us about the cyber decks, Ravi.
Yeah, so this is a new trend, which is pretty cool, actually. And they're called cyber decks. And it's interesting. These are kind of Raspberry Pi machines that are based on not laptops, but portable carry computers like you used to have back in the days. So
like the Commodore 64SX thing.
Yeah, so the Commodore 64SX is one, and I've also got a link next to that, which is the MSX one. So somebody's made this kind of MSX carry case, and it's quite nice to see people not just going, oh, we'll make a laptop. We'll get this Raspberry Pi and we'll put it in something that's really big with a mechanical keyboard, clunky, but also harks back to those kind of old days.
It's cool because, I mean, they were called luggable computers then, weren't they? Because,
Yeah.
they you couldn't sit them on your lap if you ever wanted to have children again, I don't think. But, I mean, there's a great video on YouTube. I think it's a Commodore pet users group. And what they do is, they've actually filmed this really nicely, and they'll go into their local Starbucks with like Commodore pet computers and set them up. Everyone's there with the MacBooks and stuff normally. And it's great the reactions people get. But then, a bit later on in the video, all these like parents are in there with the kids, and they're all coming over, and all these kids are having play on the games and stuff on it. It's just something a bit different.
Well, this is good as well because they're all designed to be bespoke.
Yeah.
So they're not meant to look like anything that was actually there. They're not like I'm building an Amiga laptop. That's going to kind of look a bit like an Amiga. But if I was to do an Amiga cyber deck, it would be a flat piece with a screen there, an offset keyboard, maybe a joystick built into it, or some kind of crazy monster.
If your MacBook is not hipster enough for you, then you can build yourself one of these. Now, actually, speaking of 2019 being an incredible year, you might remember at the start of the year, we had a really interesting guest on. We're talking about this game called Retro Mania Wrestling, who supported us for a month back in January. Now, at the time, we were talking about this game, the fact that it was a spiritual successor and kind of a love story to the classic 1991 arcade game, WWF WrestleFest, which, incidentally, I was playing at Arcade Club in Leeds the other week. Got absolutely trounced by my mate Paul, so we'll put that aside now. But now it turns out that WrestleMania Wrestling is officially the sequel to WrestleFest.
Yeah, so WrestleFest was a great game, but as we know, that was WWE or WWF.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't got the license for that, but they are the second part of it. So they do have a license for a really cool, actually, very popular new wrestling association, which is called the National Wrestling Association. And actually, I'm on a podcast called Remotely Interested, and we talked to Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins, who's actually involved with NWA,
Right,
which is really cool. So, he may be a playable character, you never know, but they've actually got all these guys from the roster.
And now it turns out, Arc System were the company that owned the original WrestleFest license, even though, WWF were attached to it originally.
Yeah.
They're nothing to do with it anymore. So, this company that now own the trademark on WrestleFest have allowed them to have the license to officially make this a sequel as well, which I think is incredible. So if you're a big fan of that, we'll actually link up in our show notes the latest trailer. Looking at it, it was so heavily inspired by WrestleFest anyway. It really looked and felt like it. So I think it's incredible that Retrosoft Studios have got that license now as well. And so that's what they always wanted.
And it's kind of a lost genre, those old school wrestling games. I used to really love them.
Yeah, you used to get so many of them, like, the SNES and Mega Drive and stuff, and obviously in the arcade. You just don't see anything like that anymore. So it's real refreshing to see that.
It does look incredible, though, and it is a modern game.
I think it's going to be incredibly popular because I've heard a lot of chatter about this from loads of different people going, oh, this looks so good. Have you seen this?
Now, let's talk about something that's been one of the biggest, isn't it, stories of 2019.
Would this be the VCS by any chance?
This might be the Atari VCS console. Now, every time we mention this, we kind of have to do a little recap. This is a new console using the name Atari VCS that is apparently going to be out next year. that is going to play modern games. And that's what we know about it so far. However, a lot of people... There's been a lot of negative press about it this year, it's fair to say.
I'd say there was a lot of negative press, and there was quite a few people that wanted to see it go down. And because it raised so much in the Kickstarter at the beginning as well, but also because we hadn't seen anything. Like, they hadn't shown any of the internals of it. They hadn't shown us stuff until about a month ago when we saw the motherboard and we saw some other pieces come out.
You'd literally see like a mould, like the cast of a mould, and then we start seeing the motherboard and stuff. But we're seeing a little bit more now, aren't we?
Well, we're seeing a lot more now. We're actually seeing them coming out of the production line at the factory in China. And, oh my God, how many units are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually pallets full of them here.
Yeah, we've got a picture of 6 units, 7 units.
So well done, guys. Well, it sounds like it's been a hard struggle, but I'm really glad that you've got this far,
And, a lot of the negative press mainly came from the Register. And a lot of the forums and stuff I understand as well, but I think it is cool that they've now actually shown this, and it kind of shuts up all the haters. I mean, it probably won't shut all the haters up, but I think it does definitely help. I actually know someone who's got one of these as well, so I can confirm that it does run, and it is actually a real thing. And apparently we're going to get this now March next year, the same?
March 2020. So they were basically going to release it this Christmas, but they've released these photos and put it back. But, it sounds good, and they've said that the upgrade in the processor was the actual reason for delay. So it's based on an AMD Ryzen chip, but they wanted to put a little upgrade in there, I think. So,
well, they do have a Medium blog, which, I think is good. They're actually now communicating with backers and fans a lot more. So if you want to read more about it, I know they are updating that quite regularly now. And, I actually think doing something like this, it's not an easy job. Launching a completely new platform, making all this hardware, you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
And I think, the retro community has been burnt by projects in the past, but I think to tarnish everyone with the same brush, it's not really fair. You've got to understand that, they are going to make mistakes, but now this looks like it is going to be a real product.
I think this is really interesting. We saw the Amico last week with titles and new controller, and I don't know how that's going to perform at all, but it's a new machine.
Yeah.
And VCS, we've seen a new machine, and I don't know how the hell that's going to perform either.
I think for me, the key thing is, obviously, Ravi's right. We don't know how they're going to perform and stuff. But I think for me, yes, we've been burned and everything in the past. I know I'm really, really, really pessimistic about these things.
Joe.
I know, gosh. But I think what I like is when they own it. They turn around and they've said, yeah, you know what? It's going to be March 2020. Fine. That it is what it is.
And they've given a reason why as well.
And they've given us a reason. Do you know what I mean? So... yeah, fair enough.
And it does says it supports video streaming, which is more than the Switch did at launch.
You know what, though? If someone had told you in 2020 you'd be able to buy a new Intellivision and Atari VCS console like 10 years ago, you'd be like, what? It's cool to see.
It's a mini console.
It is cool to see these brands coming back there, so we'll be keeping a very keen eye on that one. Have you got a spare $7,500 kicking around, anyone?
Me and Ravi actually pulled together recently.
To buy this disc.
This disc signed by Steve Jobs. No, we didn't really.
So the secret here...
Really? I rubbed that signature off.
Oh, bloody hell.
I thought it was a graffiti.
Well, this is a incredibly rare, because doesn't every auction have to have that written at the top of them on eBay? It's a floppy disk signed by Steve Jobs that has been valued at $7,500. Now, looking at this is a double-sided, double-density floppy disk for the original Macintosh, the Macintosh System Tools disk, version
6.0.
Signed by Steve Jobs in a biro, by the looks of it, in the middle of the disc label.
It's a black felt pen.
Okay, well, that adds another $2,000 on. But, I mean, you wouldn't think... Most people just throwing floppy disks away because they don't really think they're worth that much anymore, old media. But,
it's a save icon.
3D printed save icon. But having Steve Jobs' signature on there, obviously... gives us a lot of value.
Yeah, and I think I guess because it's not just on a piece of paper, on a napkin, it's, on a floppy disk, it's Steve Jobs' floppy disk. But what I think is quite interesting is there has actually, at the point of us recording this, there's been 7 bids on it, and it's on $4,600.
Already, and expect it to go higher.
Useless for us, Dan, though, because it's double density, so we'd have to reformat it and lose a lot of the space.
I just imagine you doing something like that, buying it, then one day you're going through your drawer, I need a disc, what's this? Putting a label over the top of it. It is crazy, though, that, this kind of what would have been classed as junk a couple of decades ago and now commanding these kind of fees. It makes you feel like every new kind of game or whatever you get, you should just, email the developers like, would you mind signing that for me? And
just do it. Yeah.
So actually, speaking of Ravi's Amiga, your Amiga 1200.
Yeah.
This could be you in like 20 years.
Yeah.
It's signed by how many people?
I've had it signed by lots of people. And for me, the greatest signature is Ben Douglas. And having that, because he's now passed away, and just to have his signature, every time I DJ, I look at it and I'm like, yes, Ben. It's great.
You'd never sell it though, would you?
Oh, no, not at all. I go to like a Viking when I die, I'll have a ship with all my Amigas on it, like Valhalla.
Just float you off into the North
Join
Sea.
me in the afterlife. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of the afterlife, what a terrible segue into this. Ghosts and Demons. Now, this is a game. Back in the day, there was always some games that I'd kind of make a beeline for when I went into the arcades, even though I was utterly terrible at it. Ghosts and Goblins, or Ghouls and Ghosts, I'd always want to play those games.
Yeah.
I was drawn to the atmosphere. I thought, that looks so cool. I generally lost about 30 seconds on each one.
So, I just wanted to get this out here. It's a true story.
Yeah.
Somehow, I did complete Ghosts and Goblins when I was about 17. Both times through. And now I go back to it, and I'm like, no, can't even get 10 minutes into it. But yeah, is this a spiritual successor?
Well, this is a fan-made game.
Yeah.
It's actually been around a few years.
Okay.
It came around for the 30th anniversary of the game in 2015, so it's been around nearly 5 years now. The reason we're talking about it is, number one, I hadn't come across it before.
Okay.
It actually looks really cool. But they've actually released an update, version 1.8, that came out last week. So what it is, it's a 30th anniversary fan game, a tribute to the Ghosts and Goblins series, if you like. It's set at the end. Again, you got Sir Arthur. He's got to get through all the zombies and evil forces and rescue the princess. The old story in the old game. But they've actually got some really cool sound effects in here.
Stunning pixel art.
Beautiful pixel art on it as well. And there's some kind of new moves and stuff you can do too. If you check out the trailer, Ghosts and Demons trailer, it does look like it's every bit as hard as the original game. Check out sound effects as well.
Fear not, I'm coming, princess.
It is really, really funny looking. And yeah, you can download this. What's great about it is, you pick your own price. It's one of these games. It's kind of like the modern version of shareware, really, isn't it? If you like it, throw a couple of quid and give it a download. Available for PC and Mac, I believe, at the moment. So you need a computer to play it on. But yeah, if you want a bit of a challenge, I always found those games so hard back in the day. And I know I'm going to get absolutely beaten by this the minute I download it. So definitely worth a look. If you want to check out that and anything else we talked about in this week's show, I'll put them in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our interview, time for our retro picks of the week. What have you been looking at this week, Ravi?
So, this is really cool. This is the Back Office show, which is Dr. Andrew Armstrong. Now, what he does is he creates little hardware interfaces, and he does them for the Atari ST and the STE. Now, there's some really cool little pieces on here. He's got a Atari ST cartridge slot USB. So you put it into the cartridge slot. You can have your USBs. He's also got RetroNet version 2, which is basically a Wi-Fi module for the Atari ST that you can stick on the back. He's got interfaces for the Ultimate joystick. And there's loads of cool little things here. So check out backofficeshow.com.
So this is like a little shop you can buy all this stuff from,
Yeah.
Okay.
And he said he'll restock it when I mention him on the show so that it doesn't get sold out.
You probably need to now.
Yeah.
The power of the retro hour. Now, I'm going to talk about a Telnet BBS guide this week because, I've been messing around again with it. You know what I'm like.
You've been on Telnet.
I got a Tel or a bulletin board open, I just get addicted to it. And if you want to mess around with your old machines, again, it's always a bit of a hobby of mine, kind of getting my old computers online. For some reason, I've got these Wi-Fi modules for every machine, pretty much. Just the thrill of getting them connected to other machines.
Have you run the Star Wars game through Star Wars film through Telnet?
Yeah, press it. Oh, the little ASCII art and stuff. Yeah, it is amazing. Well, this is. If you do get to the stage where you get your old machines online, you're thinking, what can I connect to? Really good website here called telnetbbsguide.com. It essentially lists all the active bulletin boards that you can Telnet into, and you can even, if you really want to try them out, like right now or at work, mess around with them. They've actually got a web interface as well.
Yeah, just open your command line on the PC and type in Telnet, and then you'll be able to straight away do it.
Or you can do them through their website.
Even that.
Yeah, Telnet client in the browser. So definitely worth a look if you're into the old the BBS scene or you want to check it out. Telnetbbsguide.com. And this week you've been checking out my good friend Kieran, Laird's Lair.
Yeah, so I've been checking out Laird's Lair. I'd never heard of him myself. His videos just came up on YouTube a couple of nights ago. Just you watch these guys, why not watch this guy? And I was just like, yeah, okay, I'll give it a shot. I chucked it in the show notes to Dan, and Dan was like, "Oh, I know him. He's a friend of mine." So I was like, "Oh, brilliant!" So he does some really, really interesting like episodes, like kind of not like what ifs, but you know technologies that didn't come out. But the video that stuck out for me was the story of the unreleased SNK console, the Neo Star. I found that really interesting, just finding out a little bit more about what SNK were doing, because he kind of goes into the history of the two that did come out, the CD and the what's it called, the MVS, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And he just he talks about them a little bit, and then talks about the successes that kind of never came, and the updates that never came. And I just found it really, really interesting. So check them out if you just want to know a lot more about consoles that never came to fruition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he does a lot of those kind of like unreleased and beta kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I watched one he was doing like the story of the Atari Jaguar 2 that never came out, the Sega Saturn 2.
The Atari, what was it called?
There's one of like the CD-ROM he did as well, which was weird though, because I was reading, I actually found an old issue of Atari ST User magazine randomly when I was cleaning out my garage. And I owned it, and there was actually a feature in there about this CD-ROM drive for the Atari ST that they were meant to come out. I don't think ever did. And then next day I saw he posted a video about it, and I was like, what are the chances of that? Really weird. So, I mean, it's a really good channel if you're into that kind of what-ifs and a lot of these kind of in-depth looks. At Led's Lair on YouTube, and of course we'll link that up in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, have you got any Christmas parties coming up over the next couple of weeks? Going to that way.
Yeah, so the guys are coming over to mine next Saturday.
Yep.
And then we're going over to Ravi's the week after.
And we're going to I'm going to try and live stream it, but if it's not live streamed, I'll pre-record it and then put it out.
Okay. This is a time of year when we're all in party mood now. We're coming up to Christmas. I'm going to say some words that are going to sound absolutely magical to your ears. What about this? Free beer.
Ooh.
Look at Joe's little face. Look at it like that.
That makes Christmas a lot easier.
Now, this is thanks to our amazing friends who've supported this week's episode of the Retro Hour podcast, Beer 52. Now, we love Beer 52. They are the world's most popular craft beer discovery club, and we've got a very special Christmas offer on for you. Now, thanks to our friends at beer52.com, normally we give the opportunity to sip 8 exclusive free beers from around the world.
It lasts me quite a while,
You've had one of these before, haven't you?
When I've got the cases, it's lasted me quite a while, 8 of them, so I can't believe the deal today.
Well, because it's Christmas and, Beer 52 are feeling really generous, they're going to throw in 2 extra free beers. So that is a total of 10 free beers. Now, all you have to do is cover the postage, £4.95, and you'll get 10 beers. And claim this by December 17th if you want it in time for Christmas. Now, if you're not familiar with Beer 52, they're beer pioneers. What they do is they look around the world to find the best and most inspiring beer from the greatest small batch breweries. So, I mean, it does mean that they're the most popular beer discovery club in the world. And they've included stuff like, themes like German beer, Norwegian beer, Californian beers. And, of course, being from the UK, they're really passionate about the UK craft beer scene as well. And they don't hold you at ransom. There's no lock-in. You can leave at any time. And what's more, they also let you pick your boxes as well. Like, Ravi, you're a fan of, like, the light beers, aren't you?
Yeah, I like the IPAs and stuff. And there was some quite nice pale ales. And actually, there's quite a few exciting ones. And I was like, oh, this mango milkshake, let's try it.
Yeah.
It was like lilt. It was well nice. Yeah.
And also they'll give you a craft beer magazine called Ferment, which I didn't know how interesting craft beers were till I got this really interesting read. And it's going to make your eyes light up as well, Joe. A cheeky little snack.
Yeah, cheeky little snack, little bag of pork scratchings, little bag of popcorn or something like that.
Well, there's your weekend sorted. So you're going to get 10 free beers, you're going to get a snack, and you can sit down and play retro games while listening to the Retro Hour podcast. Does that sound like the perfect weekend before Christmas?
That sounds pretty perfect.
Head to beer52.com/retro. Cover just £4.95 for postage, and you'll get 10 beers for free. beer52.com/retro with our good friends from Beer 52. Right then, time to get into our little look back on the year that was 2019. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast now. It's time to have a look back on the year 2019.
It's unbelievable, the kind of variety of guests we've had, but also the events that we've done. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through. It's going to be Ravi and Dan selecting them at the moment, and Joe's going to add in some commentary about them as well.
Or nod and smile.
It's because I'm like, often with the interviews, I sometimes get involved, but I feel like I'm the producer at the side, like just listening along.
Yeah, give yourself a fancy title,
just
Joe.
I'm going to have to make myself sound a bit. I've got a close friend of mine who listens every week.
Give him a shout.
And I'm giving him. No, he says it'll weird him out if I gave him.
I forgot his name. You tell me that.
And he always always says like, oh, Utah Saints. He's like, that was a great interview. Actually, I was there, mate. Like, I was sat at the side. I just didn't ask any questions. He's like, oh, and I was like, yeah, that happens a lot, actually. Like, I am there. Like,
not that we don't want to get you involved or anything. It's like you said, producer's role. But this year, I mean, this was one that you missed that we're going to start off with because it was actually your birthday. And you were away in Tokyo for your birthday. I was. Checking out retro gaming fairs, which, great place to be. But Norway was brilliant as well. Now, Ravi and I went to a really good event. First time we've been there. Retro Spillmessen.
Yeah, so this was in Sandefjord, Norway, and we went out there with the Rare crew. Now, we don't talk that much Nintendo on this podcast just because it's hard to get guys on, but Rare being that kind of unique British Nintendo company, we love talking to them.
Yeah, they were first-party developer for Rare back in the day. Now, we're joined on a panel by David Doak, who worked on GoldenEye, Chris Marlowe, Sean Pyle, Conker's Bad Fur Day, David Wise, who's on Donkey Kong Country, Kevin Bayliss, who's on Battletoads and Killer Instinct. And you remember they had that thing where, particularly Donkey Kong Country, where it's a SNES game, but the kind of 3D rendered graphics.
Yeah.
And at the time, how on earth have they done that? Turned out they used some very expensive silicon graphics workstations. And we got a great story from the guys about the time that Rare uses SGI workstations. Let's talk about Donkey Kong Country. I mean, that was a huge game on the Super Nintendo. Over 8 million copies sold worldwide. It seemed like a next-gen game. So I remember the adverts were, it's not 64-bit, it's not 32-bit, and you use that really impressive technique of doing pre-rendered 3D graphics. So that was called advanced computer modeling. Explain a bit about what that was and where that idea came from.
Advanced computer modeling. We had a lot of these acronyms, didn't we? Was there any more? Rare dynamic animation. That was the next one. RDA. Whereas before we'd draw the character on paper and we'd pixelate it, and then we moved on from pixelating it and decoding it to having an actual editor, which was like using, I guess, a very, very primitive version of Photoshop. It was all 2D. We invested in the 3D software, which was called Power Animator at the time. It's evolved since then, and it's now called Maya or Maya. So you'd build a wireframe model, and the computer would generate, it'd transfer all of these curves into tiny, tiny triangles, and the light would hit all of the squares and triangles, and it'd create a solid shape. And we point a camera at it, and the camera then makes a rendered image of a 3D ape or a 3D collection of shapes to resemble an ape. We move them around, and as soon as the light was hitting it and the shadows would appear, it'd look very solid. And so those were then 2D images, which we would have an alpha channel, so there was a mask around it, and it became a sprite. And so we just lay those sprites, played them as animation, and basically you'd got a small film show of everything that you were making in 3D. And it looked like it was actually real-time rendering, but of course it wasn't. It was all sprites.
This was one of the incredible things that Chris and Tim, they made a real leap of faith, and they invested heavily not only in the latest software, but also the latest hardware, all the indies and things that all the SGI machines, silicon graphics that... These machines were hugely expensive and they were quite rare, and literally the only place that had more of these machines was Pixar, which were doing a little thing called Toy Story at the time. So whilst they were developing Toy Story, we were doing this same rendering technique and turning it into video games. And one quite funny story is that at one point the Ministry of Defence had to contact Rare to say, why do you have all these basically supercomputers all sitting...
What is that you're building in your
basically like a bunker, a secret lair in the middle of the countryside? Are you planning to try and take over a third world country? And it was going, no, we're actually making video games.
And it's interesting that, because I was, at the time, I was doing postgrad, so I was doing science research, and my field was molecular modelling. So in the lab where I worked, I used silicon graphics to look at molecular models, and then as part of my job, I looked after the other silicon graphics machines around in the building. So in this quite well-funded, it was Oxford Centre for Molecular Sciences, internationally recognised, funded, cutting-edge research institute. I think we had about over the whole site that I was responsible for. There were probably about, I don't know, half a dozen, 8 SG machines, and they were the fairly cheap ones. So the cheap ones came in at about £25,000 each. And I went to Rare to look after. So that's right. And the software. So a license for Maya was like $6,000 a year, or what was Power Animator at the time, wasn't it? Yeah. So when I went to Rare, and I got the job at Rare because I knew how to look after selling graphics machines. And when I turned up, kind of day one, it's like, well, how many are there to look after? So, well, basically, all the artists have one. So there's there's probably about 30 or something around the place. And we've got those big ones, the ones that look like big blue fridges that cost $2 million or something. We've got a couple of those. And we've got these other ones.
And they had amazing names like Death Star.
Yesterday I mentioned the Death Star.
The Death Star, the Death Star, and then there was Jabba and stuff. But it was great. I mean, it's like, so these guys had in research in a top institution, they didn't have the money to buy these things, but Rare was just full of them.
So that was such a good panel. If you want to check out the full thing recorded at Retro Spill Mess and loads more incredible anecdotes like that about the inside story of Rare, I'll put a link to that episode and every other one that we mentioned.
And you can check it on YouTube as well.
You can. The full video's up there as well. I'll put it all at theretrohour.com. Now, Robbie Back, he was an interesting guy.
Yeah, so Robbie Back, we've talked to people in Microsoft about the Xbox before, and we've had Ed Fries on. Robbie Back was the president of Entertainment and Devices, which was really awesome. And he talks about a moment which probably changed all of our lives, but we never think about how much September the 11th changed the gaming world. And this is Robbie's experience, amazing experience of the launch of the Xbox and how it was nearly destroyed by September the 11th happened.
I mean, around that time, the whole world changed because obviously 9/11 happened around then too. I mean, that obviously delayed the launch of the Xbox, didn't it? And I know you guys had quite an epic road trip to get across America.
Yeah, that had a lasting impact on me. I mean, I literally flew into New York the morning of 9/11. I landed about 6 a.m. on a red eye from Seattle.
Wow.
And I took a cab to the hotel at the Marriott in Times Square. Went up to my room and caught 2 or 3 hours of sleep. I woke up, I don't know, it was probably 9:30. And I got a call from the lawyer at our PR agency. I was there for a press tour, and I got a call from our lawyer at the PR agency telling me that, hey, I know your press tour has been canceled. If there's any way I can help, our offices are across the street. Just let me know. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And I had to turn on the television to see 9/11 happening in front of me. And then I was able to go to the window and look down, and you could see some of the smoke rising above the buildings. And we did. Then there was a dash to figure out how you could get home, and you wanted to be with your family and be with your loved ones, and they were worried about you. They knew we were in New York. They couldn't call my cell phone because the cell tower had been knocked down. We were communicating by pager. I had a BlackBerry pager, so we were sending text messages on a BlackBerry pager. We got a group of 4 people together, and we got in a Ford Taurus, and we drove across the country. And I write about that in the book Xbox Revisited, but I'm just finishing a second book, and I'm writing about it again. It had a lasting impact on me, and I think it changed our country forever in some good ways, and unfortunately mostly in some bad ways.
Well, you met a really nice GameStop employee on the road trip with all the Microsoft stand displaying. He must have been happy to see you when you turned up.
That's a great story. We're in Mount Rushmore Mall in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Or is it Sioux? I think it's Sioux Falls. Anyway, it's in the west part of South Dakota. And we go into the Mount Rushmore Wall because we're going to get some food. And we had to buy pillows because we decided we were going to drive through the night. And there's a software, et cetera. It wasn't even, this was before EB Games, an electronic boutique. It was a software, et cetera, at the time. And they had all the Xbox materials up waiting for the launch. And we walked in. The guy's name's Derek Barnes. And we chatted with Derek. We took pictures. I have the pictures with Derek. Derek and I have stayed in touch. I exchanged email with him about a year ago. I was doing a speech down in Florida, and he was almost able to come to the speech. But we've stayed in touch. He was working there. He ended up working in IT. He's gone on to have a family. And, it's just one of those personal connections you make that last for a lifetime.
Well, I hear when the Times Square launch happened, it was still quiet in America. They were quite high with security and stuff. And Bill Gates was actually out there kind of playing games with fans and promoting it.
We did have a lot of security stuff that we had to do. But having said that, if you get to know Bill, he pays attention to security because he has to. and he's careful. Once he had a family, he got very careful. But, his view was, hey, this is what I need to do. And, I'm not going to not do it because there's bad people in the world. That's just not the way we do things. And so we did that was really the first big thing in Times Square after 9/11. And that Toys R Us was brand new. It used to be an old movie theater. It was the first event at that Toys R Us. And, we were able to light up Times Square, which was, quite cool. And again, only 3 months after 9/11. So for me, quite emotional.
As you can hear from that, it's just amazing to hear about Bill Gates running around Times Square trying to flog Xboxes. It's just absolutely amazing. And, you kind of think about how much that changed the game industry, how many games were cancelled because of that, how many games were delayed, how many films were cancelled. It's crazy, really.
Really did have a far-reaching impact, didn't it? Someone check out the full chat with Robbie back. That was episode 154 of the Retro Hour. Now, back in the summer, this is when you're off on your travels, Joe and I were in, and I spoke to a guy who wrote a book that I just randomly picked up, and I was reading about this incredible system, and I remember thinking, this just sounds like too good to be real. It can't
this
be
was
true.
like Dan's special episode. This was because I was like away.
Special episode.
No, but I was away and I was like, Dan's like, oh, can I do this episode on this small system called Plato?
Yeah.
And then he released it and it just blew up. It was amazing.
It was one of our biggest episodes of the year. Now, this was with Brian Deere. This was, I titled the episode, The Greatest Computer Network You've Never Heard Of. And he wrote a book called The Friendly Orange Glow. And it was a system that kind of birthed cyberculture and online gaming. But it did all this back in like the early 70s, I think the late 60s actually. So many technologies were invented on Plato. But there's one great little story that he told, because obviously this is kind of a university system. A lot of students worked in it, computer science students who, to be fair, probably a little bit nerdy. Big fans of Star Trek. And then one day, one of their celebrity guests came in who was Leonard Nimoy. Of course, Spock from Star Trek, who, as we know in the show, Spock is like the world's greatest chess player, or the universe's.
It's logical.
Turns out, not so much in real life. Well, there is one really funny chapter of your book talking about Empire, kind of following on from that. You said it was based on Star Trek, and Leonard Nimoy, Spock, actually got to see Empire and Plato.
So what happened there is, after Star Trek, Nimoy was kind of typecast and had difficulty getting other roles, and because he was so immediately, the only thing missing were the pointing ears, and but Nimoy was Spock and he hated it, and so he decided to go and do stage acting for a long time, and he went around the country and did all kinds of roles. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and all kinds of famous Broadway shows and everything. And he typically was the star, of course. And, he wanted to show that he's a real actor, and that because the Star Trek thing had just really kind of ruined his career in a way. In 1974, he happened to be playing the lead role in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at a tiny little but very popular theater in tiny town in the middle of nowhere in central Illinois. And it was about an hour away from Champaign-Urbana. And so, since Champaign-Urbana was the biggest town around, one day to promote his new play, he came and did a media day with, meeting with television and reporters and things like that. Somehow, the University of Illinois and the Plato Lab heard that he was in town. And so that got added to his itinerary. So he was invited to come and get a tour of what was called the Computer-Based Education Research Lab, which was this funky brick old building, which was the birthplace and home of Plato. And he got a tour of the different floors of the building, and was invited up to the penthouse where all the cool kids hung out. And that's where they did music programming. And, of course, everyone had a terminal on their desk, and they showed Nimoy Empire and three-dimensional chess, and what was really funny, I spoke to a lot of people who remember the Leonard Nimoy visit. I would be bringing it up to these people who had not heard about it for 30 or 40 years. And the first thing they would tell me is like, oh, he was drunk, or he smelled of alcohol. And even Don Bitzer remembered it that way. It was really funny. That was the first thing he thought too, when And so if you were a diehard Star Trek fan and you were 17 or 18 years old, and in walks Leonard Nimoy to your office at the Plato Lab, first of all, you're in complete awe, but then you're in shock because he doesn't have his ears. He's not wearing his Federation, blue and black uniform. He doesn't have the boots on, and all the rest. He doesn't have the weird haircut. And it's not Spock, but it is. And here was Leonard Nimoy with a scruffy beard, wearing glasses, and just a regular guy. And so that kind of drove the Plato people crazy. And then they discovered, he confessed when they showed him this gorgeous chess game that was on full graphics of, there were knights and rooks and kings and queens and pawns, and it was all graphically rendered. And you could play against the computer, and the computer was wicked smart. Nimoy looked at it, and it's like, he had to confess that he didn't know how to play chess. And that just devastated the Star Trek fans in the room because, you're Spock. You're like the greatest chess player of all. So it was this gigantic disconnect between the fans and the actor, and it was just really, really funny.
Now, while Ravi was on his travels, and I was recording my special episode about Plato, you were actually chatting to a company in Brazil. Now, this is Tectoy. Now, we often talk about on the show, how we're big fans of Sega, particularly you, Joe, our resident Sega fanboy.
I know, I am the resident Sega fanboy. I thought this was a great episode. So it was really interesting to see that essentially the Master System is like the best-selling console in Brazil.
Yeah.
Coming from a company, quite a big company in Brazil, Tectoy. They do make like toys, like as we know them for little boys and little girls and stuff. But they have the rights to the Master System and the Mega Drive, I believe.
Yeah, and they even have their own versions. Like I think it's up to Master System 4,
right.
And they've got like a portable one as well. They've Mega Drive 3 or something like that. It's crazy. But we're going to go to the alternate world of Brazil where Sega still dominates, and we're going to talk about banking on the Mega Drive and how that turned into SegaNet, and then kind of turned into online play with low latency.
Well, you mentioned that you know the machines in and out, and kind of you guys offered online banking and MegaNet as well. So SegaNet, you had a second version of that. So you'd be able to do online banking on your Mega Drive?
Yeah, this was amazing. We have one bank here in Brazil, which is called Bradesco. It's a huge bank, really big. And, this is 1994, right? In 93, 93 we introduced it. So in 93, online banking was quite different what it was today, you have to imagine. And the problem in Brazil that you had the state monopoly of the telephone lines. So the telephone lines were very, very expensive. So something they could, in money of today, I would guess something like, 6,000 pounds, something like that for one telephone line. So the bank had a big problem because it was quite expensive for them to have customer service and because of the huge investment in all those lines. And we developed a system through Mega Drive that would talk to the bank for 16 seconds, right? So with your Mega Drive, when you contacted the computer on the bank, in 16 seconds we would download all the information and then you would continue offline. And the bank simply loved it because any contact they had with the consumers at that time was like, 5 minutes in average, something like that. And we changed this to 16 seconds, right? So they loved the idea, and we sold a ton of those banking units because of the help of the bank. And also they had a fantastic technology because most of the lines in Brazil, they were not digital at that time. They were analogic. So you can imagine it was really tough, but they had excellent technology. And while developing this technology with this bank, we came up with the MegaNet. And with the MegaNet, you could play head-to-head with very low latency.
I love the fact that Sega is still like king over there. That's a reason to go for it.
It's still alive.
Now, another great interview that we did back in the summer. This was Bruce Everest. Now, Bruce, I mean, we did get a lot of tweets after that episode going, blimey, he doesn't hold back, does he? And I love it when we have guests like that. Or like, you know, all this stuff happened years ago. It's going to be no holes barred, warts and all. I'm going to tell you everything about it. And this was the story of Imagine Software. Now, there's a documentary that I'm a big fan of that you can check out online, Commercial Breaks, which, if you've never, have you seen Commercial Breaks before?
Yeah, I've seen it. And in our recent talk to Charlie Brooker as well about Bandersnatch, he mentioned how much of an influence this was to Bandersnatch.
Yeah, well, Bandersnatch was actually going to be what they called the mega games. So this is one of these games that apparently you'd have to have extra hardware for, and they're going to retail for a really high price, hyped to high heaven, and actually ended up bringing down Imagine Software. And we got the story of these mega games from the man who had the responsibility of marketing these non-existent games, Bruce Everest.
You mentioned piracy was such an issue there. Was it kind of unstoppable, or did you guys try and put any measures in there?
Oh, we did all sorts. I mean, I don't know if you remember, there was something called lens lock.
Yes.
But that was just one of many, many, many measures. One thing we did, for instance, is we tried to change the way the game loaded. So we made the game so it had a very small header, overwrote the Sinclair loader, and then put our own loader in. And then our own loader did it with a really fancy pattern on the screen, but it really didn't answer. So then I was thinking back to my days of doing the commercial accounting software. And what they did to protect their accounting software was they supplied a dongle. And the dongle plugged into the back of your, this is big old-fashioned computers, plugged in, basically. And the software wouldn't work without the dongle. So I said to David and to Mark, I said what we could do is we could make a dongle that plugs into the back of the Sinclair Spectrum, or the Commodore 64 or whatever, and the software goes and looks for the dongle, and it'll only work if the dongle's there. Now, what I was thinking of, was maybe a resistor or a capacitor array, which you could read, or at the very most, a little custom chip that you could mass produce very cheaply for pennies. That was my idea. And then what they decided was, hell, what we can do is we can put 64K of RAM in the dongle and switch it. And suddenly, the whole idea exploded like Topsy and became the mega games, Cyclops and Bandersnatch.
Well, these are the two things that a lot of people remember Imagine for, though. Those two games that, like you said, it was... How expensive were they going to be? They were going to be much more than the average game, weren't they?
The games then, I can't remember, was $4.95 or something, and these were going to be 40 or 50 quid, because you had to pay for the damn box on the back, the dongle, with the 64K of memory in. So they took what could have been an idea that might have worked, and they just took it to the nth degree when it wouldn't work.
Well, like you said, you had the job of doing the marketing here, and these games, I mean, I remember seeing those adverts and how hyped they were in the media at the time. And it was, it was really exciting advertising, but it kind of felt like you were promising the world with these games that were coming out. I mean, how did you approach marketing these two, mega games?
Well, blimey. First of all, the guys who were supposed to, they were doing 2 teams of 2, and they weren't doing anything. The guys weren't doing anything. The games weren't being written. So each month came by, and I'd say, what am I going to do? We've got the advertising booked in the magazines. And I said, well, you have to go away and think about it. So I did adverts like Reinforcements Arrive, where the musicians and the artists arrived, and things like that. And because I didn't have any substance. I had no substance at all. I had nothing. I was just advertising complete vaporware. There was nothing there to market. I was marketing nothing.
So there was no development or nothing running before it actually got cancelled?
There was token development, but nothing of substance.
So remember, these games were going to be much bigger than the average Spectrum and C64 game, and they're going to have stuff like extra stuff in the box, and essentially these were going to be massive big budget titles that you just couldn't imagine the average kid in like the mid-'80s being able to afford.
That's true. They've gone a step too far in their ambition, perhaps.
And did you try and rein them back in? Was anyone like saying to these guys, this is like not going to work? Or?
No, well, I worked there, but the company was owned by Mark and David. And they thought the success of the company was down to their genius. And if anything they touched and everything they said would turn to gold. So it was very difficult to actually approach them with any reality.
Well, did you know that Charlie Brooker was going to use Bandersnatch for inspiration for his recent Black Mirror movie? I thought that was
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
But it just shows how ingrained in popular culture that marketing was, because there was nothing else except the marketing. I mean, the Brooker thing, all it was about was what was effectively just a piece of marketing.
See, that is one thing I really love when we get real stories of like legend, or even stuff that's become like urban legends in the gaming industry, and you get it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, he's very frank, isn't he?
Yeah, love having Bruce on. Now, Brian Collin, he was an interesting guy. Rampage, that was a legendary arcade game.
Yeah, so Brian Collin, he was behind Rampage, and that was with Bally Midway, and Bally Midway were the kind of guys that initially they did a lot of pinball games, and you know, this is fantastic because we're talking about Rampage, which was a completely huge game, but Brian really struggled to get it commissioned. And this is how he took the idea of a block that you can't kind of move or do anything with, how to turn that into a game, and also how the change of management helped Brian actually get it commissioned. I initially hear that management kind of took a bit of convincing to get the idea of Rampage through, you know, monsters tearing up a city.
Yeah, that's the understatement. That's a massive understatement. We were in a meeting after one of these trade shows, and I saw some things that other companies were doing with background animation and big characters, and I wanted to do big characters. I'd done one game with a triple-size sprite character that I could really show facial features and comedy. I could really show comedy, and so I wanted to do something, and I was trying to convince the hardware guys, and there's like, no, you can't do anything. We've only got a screen and a half of background on this hardware. It doesn't scale. There's nothing you can do, Brian. Just get it out of your head. All you can do is, move a rectangle. What are you going to do with a moving rectangle? And I looked at Sharon, one of the other animators, and I said, okay, a building falling into itself, that's a moving rectangle. What knocks down buildings? A giant character, larger than usual. I can sell comedy. Pulled in a couple more people. We all were excited. We said we've got in the original game design document, which usually they were on cocktail napkins, but I actually typed one up for this one. I said, this is the story of Rampage, or why this is next year's #1 game. We all knew it. We all knew we had a hit. Went to our boss, and he said no.
Wow.
I've got other things going on. So I went to a vice president, and he said, hey, no, I like this. This could be funny, but no. And all of upper management had reasons why we couldn't do it. We couldn't be fighting the police. We couldn't be fighting the army. You couldn't be a bad guy. You can't eat people. I hadn't told them that they were going to turn naked at the end yet. But my programmer I'd been working with on a couple games, Jeff Nauman, he and I went ahead anyway and started proving out the concept. And it wouldn't have happened except right around that time, within weeks, all of upper management, the top president and top three guys got let go by Bally Midway. And they brought in a guy from retail who, in his initial talk to the troops, said, I've got an open door policy. And you can guess who was waiting for him outside his door the next morning at 8:59 a.m. And he signed off on it, and it went on to break every earnings record of any video game of the time. That was, of course, Rampage.
Yeah, that was such an interesting episode. Episode number 195, a couple of months ago.
Yep.
Obviously, we'll put all these full links to the entire episodes if you want to check them out over your Christmas break. Now, one of my favourite shows that we did this year was about a budget label that was massive in Britain here back in the day. And we had Anthony Guter on talking about Mastertronic. Now, they were kind of the kings of budget titles. The games that, in the late 80s, early 90s, you go out with your pocket money, a couple of quid in your pocket, and they were the games that you could afford to buy. They had the legendary 199 range. And the problem that they had back then, you got to think in the 80s, there were so many different platforms.
Well, there was also lots of stuff coming from America as well. So there was like US Gold as well, and all these different people releasing stuff. I remember Mastertronics did the Sega stuff for a while, didn't they?
Yeah, they were actually the UK distributor of the Master System when it first came out. It got bought by Virgin in the end. But in this clip here, Anthony's talking about the problem they had. Having so many different platforms, you think about the Amstrad CPC, the Spectrum, Commodore 64, Commodore 16, MSX for a bit they even covered. So he's talking about the challenges of the 80s platform wars. Well, which were the most important platforms for Mastertronic?
Well, the Spectrum and C64 to start with. The C16, funnily enough, took off because we took an interest in it when hardly anybody else did.
Yeah.
So we had amazing sales on the C16 for a couple of years before other people woke up to it, and of course by then it was probably dying as a machine anyway. We dabbled with everything that we thought we could make money off. So we had a couple of releases for the Dragon, which didn't sell. We had 2 or 3 for the Electron, which weren't terribly exciting. You know, you whatever came along, you thought was going to be good. You had to invest in it because you didn't know. Everybody thought MSX was going to be huge, and it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, like today you bring a game out, you only need to get it on 2 or 3 platforms, really. But back then, I mean, was it a challenge having so many different platforms?
No, it was. We rapidly found people who were really good at converting them. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, Spectrum and Amstrad were very similar, same chip anyway. The real problem, I suppose, with converting is that if you have a game written for C64, it probably looks better than can be reproduced on the Spectrum. So very often they had to be recoded or redesigned, and you actually got 2 different games. You know, if you saw that game on your friend's C64 and then you rushed out to buy it for the Spectrum, you'd get something different.
I always remember seeing the screenshots on the back of boxes, and then, you know, they'd look amazing, and then you get it home and put it in your Commodore 16, and then you notice the...
Well, yes, but that was your fault for buying a Commodore 16, with respect. That's the trouble. If you read the letters pages, I've done a lot of research reading the magazines in order to get the history, and the letters pages are full of letters from people who always start out, "Dear sir, I am the proud owner of," insert name of my machine here. And you couldn't get it across to people that they really, you know, being proud of a machine that wasn't a particularly good spec was a false path. But if you wanted to enjoy this hobby, and bearing in mind all the games for the same price, you should get the best machine you could get. And we used to have these furious arguments that still go on between Spectrum and C64 owners as to which is the best computer. And I've seen, you know, Spectrum games and I've seen 64 games. There's no arguing about it in my mind. I bought a C64 just before I started Mastertronic, based on the reviews. And I used to play the games, and it was obviously a better machine.
Well, we're going to get some tweets now.
I'm sure I've offended everybody now, but, you know...
But they also had the disclaimer on the game boxes as well, didn't they? Screenshots may vary.
Yeah, well, yes. I'm afraid that's the reality of it. But, you know, if you think about it, the inlay, you don't want to start mucking around with lots of different designs for inlays. You need to get the inlay off to the printers, and they print... The more they can print of any one type of inlay, the cheaper it is, so you use the same screenshots.
And I'm so glad we did an episode about Mastertronic. That was something I wanted to do for years, so thank you for coming on, Anthony. That was such a good episode.
And it's mad to think that you'd have to create one game and port it for about all those different systems.
I can't disagree with his comments about the 64. That probably was the best, let's be honest. I don't get any more angry tweets. Now, an episode that we did very recently, in fact only 2 weeks ago, but we couldn't leave him out of the best of the year. This is Mr. Charlie Brooker. And you're still starstruck, Joe.
Yeah, I was pretty starstruck by this one, and he even said, he was like, "Oh, you're awfully quiet, Joe." And I was just like, I'm a little bit nervous, mate.
Little voice in the corner.
Little voice in the corner. But yeah, this was absolutely amazing that Charlie Brooker came on to the show for our 200th episode, which was just insane when Dan and Ravi said it was happening. And then it's still insane just to look back on, but it was an absolutely fantastic episode. And I felt like it was like we got to know him as well.
Yeah. And I think it's a really open interview. And I think the best thing about it was kind of we've talked to so many people about getting games commissioned, about Games Master, about all the old video game shows on TV and how much they struggled to get a presence, you know, how much they struggled to actually get it big. And when it did get big, like Games Master, it just got dropped afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie's managed to get probably the most video game shows commissioned by any single person that I know. And we're talking about how he managed to get that kind of idea through, but also the celebrities and the other guys that have gaming ideas and a secret hidden gamers.
Instead of reviewing TV shows, I'm just going to do games one week. And I think there was a bit of nervousness about it. And then I can't now remember, but I think it may have been part of the season that they were doing. on BBC4. You had to sort of wait, a bit like a frog waiting. I'm going to use a video game analogy, a bit like waiting at the side of the river in Frogger for a long log to come along. You had to wait for a season to come along that had a sort of technology theme or some sort of leisure theme before they would allow you to do something about games. And you do have to spend a lot of time explaining to people that games aren't for kids, and all this stuff, all these conversations that you thought had died out years ago. That that's sort of quite frustrating. And I remember but they gave us the go ahead, and it was about 45 minutes. It was longer than a usual thing. It was like a one-off special. The other slightly frustrating thing is that I've done 2 sort of very video game centric factual entertainment shows. You could say I did Games Wipe, and which was 2008, and then How Video Games Changed the World, which was a few years later for Channel 4. And in both of them, you kind of feel the need to have to explain what games are to people because there's so few games shows like on TV, which is very odd because, everyone working on the show was basically into games. Our director, Al Campbell, who plays Barry Shitpeas as well, is massively into games, like hugely into games. Like it was very frustrating. So we did a one-off, and then the thought was that we were going to. I don't think I'd be the right person to present that on a regular basis because I sort of felt that should be somebody else, like younger or like more than one person, but that you could use the same format and the same tone and the same style. But they didn't seem that interested in it. I guess being BBC4, they had to commission a lot of documentaries about the Clash.
And I'm sure everyone's listened to the full thing. So it was by far our biggest episode of the year. But go back and listen to it again. Wasn't it? I mean, come on, not blowing our own trumpet. I'm blowing Charlie's trumpet here. It was amazing. That didn't sound wrong at all, did it? Charlie Brooker, who's on episode 200. If you want to check it out, go back and have a listen over Christmas. Now, this year, we actually got one of my heroes on the Retro Hour. And this was a guy who was behind so many of my favourite games growing up. Now, I've talked before about the pains of being a Commodore Plus 4 owner as a kid and, a system that had been discontinued years before I got it. And you'd have to go into shops and like, have you got any games, sir? And the guy at the back and get off an old dusty box and stuff. But there's one guy who really made that platform sing. And then later on, he did some of the best games on the Amiga as well, stuff like Kid Chaos, the Lotus series, best racing games of the era. And this was the legend that is Sean Southern. And in this clip, we had to ask him about the Lotus games. So how did you get the Lotus license?
I think this was completely down to Gremlin. We started doing this game and it had Porsches in it. And Andrew, he wasn't that miffed, obviously, to be told, oh, yes, you can do a game with Lotuses and it's a proper license and it should do really well because of it. But he'd drawn all the Porsches. He's got the pictures somewhere. He's probably showed you. But, they just changed it for Lotuses and most of the rest stayed the same. We'd probably half written the game before they told us.
And did you get a Lotus in the end?
I didn't, no. I think Andrew had one.
Did you get to drive any, though, when you were making
Oh, yeah, we did quite a few things like that. We went to the test track in Norwich on one of the days when I think it was about 38 degrees in 1999, 1990, yeah. And, it was so hot, and we were driving around in those things, you could barely see over the windscreen when I'm sitting in them because I'm quite tall and had to lie back and couldn't see the ground. But yeah, we had a drive of them, and I think for other games, I think we sort of did rallying and things later on.
Well, did Lotus themselves have any demands or changes they wanted to make on the game?
Yeah, I think so. I think they had to approve things. I'm not sure they had particularly wanted any changes, but they certainly had to agree that the cars looked correct and I think some of the pages had specifications and things on like that, but I'm sure Andrew would do those correctly anyway.
Yeah, because I guess, big brands like that are quite protective about merchandise, I guess, aren't they?
I think there was another Lotus game a lot later on, wasn't there? So we didn't have anything to do with that one, but they probably got a lot more input on that one.
Well, the series really came into its own with the second game, Lotus 2. What changes did you make there when designing the second game, and how did you want to improve upon the first one?
A lot of people said when it came out, said that, why did we change the laps and things. But again, this was more making it like Outrun, and I think I always wanted to do the sort of the checkpoint-based thing, just have you run out of time in the next level and everything, make it more arcadey, and I'm glad we changed it. I mean, then the third one came out and we'd put everything back in it. But I certainly wanted to get all the weather effects and all the different courses, because as good as I like playing the first Lotus one, because it's very sort of tense and you've got to plan it and everything. It's nice to have all the new graphics and all the new sound effects and different features in the game.
Yeah, and the engine sound effects and that, the checkpoint, that was always like really...
that was Andrew.
Yeah.
He insisted on doing all the voices.
I hope I didn't fanboy too much over Sean in that episode, but it's just somebody who was behind like these games that really shaped my childhood. I love getting people like that.
And also we've had Barry Leach on the show, so if you want to look back at his, he talks a lot about the sound behind Lotus, which was also such a banging soundtrack.
Now, this has been a great year for the podcast. Now, we've got one final clip to play, and this is a very good friend of ours who's actually going to be joining us for our Christmas stream that we're going to be doing at your house, actually, next weekend.
Yeah, so this is Retro Man Cave, Neil Thomas, and actually, it's a talk that we never cover on this show, which is simulators.
Flight sims.
Yeah, we never talk about simulators, and it's actually really interesting how he's talking about how flight simulators drove technology back then. And I remember, people would run the best flight simulators. They'd have huge PCs to run them, and how now it's kind of about first-person shooters, and that's taken the benchmark crown from the flight simulators. Well, initially you said that you were doing some stuff about flight simulators.
Yeah, in fact, the folder in which all of my YouTube videos are in are still called FS Chap. That is the folder, as in Flight Sim Chap. I don't quite know how that name came about, but... Yeah, flight simulators have always interested me. I think I've always had an interest for, simulations in general, not just flight sims. And, some of the standout games for me, certainly in the 8-bit era, were games like Paul Woke's Mercenary. I don't know if you played that one. And even though that was a wireframe 3D game, you had the freedom to explore. And it was almost like an early sandbox experience, if you like. And then you had flight sims like F-18 Interceptor on the Amiga, MiG-29, and the Falcon series after that. And it was just interesting for me, the freedom they gave you and how much they really pushed the system. And they didn't just push the system, I think they also shaped the systems that they were on. For example, Jay Miner, who you all know as the father of the Amiga, he added ham or Holden modified to the Amiga because of his love for flight sims. It was a feature in commercial flight sims at the time, so he specifically wanted that in the Amiga for that reason. And Chris Curry from Acorn, he said in an interview that he created a computer just because he wanted to be able to fly a flight sim. And when he saw the first flight sim running on an Acorn computer, that's when he considered his machine to be a success. So I think... Yeah, my love of flight sims is just the way that they tie in so much with the hardware and the freedom they gave you before sandbox was a term that was bandied about in gaming.
And they were kind of massively popular. And like you said, they kind of did that hardware drive was to, get the better flight sim and to get it in nicer quality.
It really did. They really did. Even back when IBM PC compatibles came about, back in the 80s, they tested them with Lotus 123 and Microsoft Flight Sim. And if it could run those two programs, then it was considered compatible because between them, they really tested the boundaries of the system. They really do push the systems.
So with that being said about flight simulators, they're kind of like a lost genre now. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's certainly less of them. They're not lost completely. I think Microsoft really screwed the pooch when they changed Microsoft Flight Simulator to Microsoft Flight. I don't know if you followed that a few years back.
Yeah.
And their aim was basically to divide the world into pay-to-play regions where Flight Sim had previously been the entire world. Even if you had to pay for add-on packs to get a bit more scenery and make it a bit more interesting, you could fly around the world. And the Flight Sim crowd, I don't think, was prepared to swallow that. So that basically killed the big one, MS Flight Sim. But we still got things like X-Plane, and DCS World is an example of a combat flight sim that's pretty incredible. in terms of its simulation and its presentation. But I think if you really want to push our modern PCs, our i7s and our GeForce 1080s or whatever the latest tech is now, it takes a lot of development time to really create the modern equivalent. And I think when the returns are so much greater for the effort on something like Call of Duty, or the FPSs, I think developers don't really want to put the time, the effort or the money into the genre really, when they can get more returns elsewhere. So it's sad. Flight sims deserve their day in the sun again, but I don't think we'll ever see those 5 kilogram big boxes on the shelves again, full of manuals and maps.
So there you go, a look back at 2019, and I think it's fair to say, best year of the podcast yet. What an incredible year we've had. And thank you so much for being there for the last 51 episodes that we've released in 2019. Next week, then, is going to be our final episode of the year. As you know, before Christmas, we always do something a little special. And that is the Retro Hour annual Christmas Super
Quiz. And then we
Quiz.
have 1 week off, guys.
Woo!
1 week out of how many episodes?
So there won't be an episode released between Christmas and New Year. But next week, the quiz, which is going to be hosted by Paul Drury from Retro Gamer Magazine and Oliver Wilmot. I'm going to be answering questions, which I must admit I'm feeling, what's the phrase? Terrified? I think might be the phrase.
But I was going to be like shaking in your boots.
I'm feeling glad I'm not going to be the worst this time. We'll see. We'll see.
I'm hoping he's jinxed it now.
Yeah.
Touch
wood.
Dan's just amazing the whole way
through.
I'm
bluffing. I get everyone right. Definitely not going to happen.
It's the mirror behind him.
On that note, I'm going to go home and revise and play like pretty much every retro video game that ever existed for the next week. So we'll see you next week for our Christmas special. Thank you so much for being there in 2019, and join us next week for the quiz.
Enjoying the show? Why not check out some other great retro gaming podcasts like Retro Asylum, RGDS, Maximum Power Up, Arcade Attack, Arcade Perfect, and the 10 Pence Arcade.